Yes, the minister's close to me. That makes me feel more secure.
Yeah, exactly.
This is this is my technique.
Ah, I like it.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, colleagues. On the occasion of International Women's Day, we, the representatives of Colombia, Denmark, France, Greece, Latvia, Liberia, the United Kingdom, signatories of the shared commitments on women, peace and security, joined also by Portugal, Spain, Estonia, Albania, Ireland, Italy, Liechtenstein, Malta, Canada, Montenegro, Croatia, Sweden, Luxembourg, Bulgaria, Sweden, Slovenia, Czechia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, New Zealand, Austria, Belgium, Australia, Finland, Afghanistan, Switzerland, Romania, Japan, Germany, European Union, Iceland, Republic of Korea, and Norway, and my own country, Panama, stand in solidarity with the women and girls of Afghanistan and strongly condemn their continued and systematic repression by the Taliban. The human rights situation in Afghanistan has reached an increasingly critical level, including the implementation of the law on the propagation of virtue and prevention of vice. We condemn the recent adoption by the Taliban of a new nationwide penal code which institutionalizes systemic discrimination against women and girls, transforming previously imposed restrictions into binding legal provisions. This code weakens protections against gender-based violence, including provisions allowing husbands to physically punish their wives and children, while severe acts of violence may result in minimal imprisonment sentences. This reinforces impunity and undermines access to justice and protection mechanisms, constituting clear violations of Afghanistan's obligations under international human rights law. We condemn the persistent erasure of women and girls from public life, including restrictions on access to education, healthcare, employment, freedom of movement, and participation in society. Afghanistan remains the only country in the world where girls are banned from secondary and higher education, denying millions of girls their fundamental rights. Limitations on the training and participation of women health professionals raise serious concerns regarding access to maternal health care, preventable mortality, and growing mental health impacts nationwide. At the same time, civic and media space continues to shrink, with activists, journalists, and civil society actors facing increasing risks of reprisals and detention. Restrictions imposed by the Taliban on women working for the United Nations and humanitarian organizations violate Security Council Resolution 2681 of 2023 and hinder the delivery of humanitarian aid, including medical care to women and girls. We urge the Taliban to immediately reverse all measures restricting the rights of women and girls, restore access to education, lift employment bans and reprisals, and respect Afghanistan's obligations under international law, including the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. The ban preventing Afghan UN female staff from accessing their workplaces must be lifted immediately. We welcome the recent visit to Kabul by Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo and the recent report of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. We commend the establishment of the Human Rights Council of an independent mechanism to document violations of international human rights law and note the work of the International Criminal Court. We urge measurable progress on women's rights through the UN-led Doha process and the full implementation of Resolution 2593 of 2021. As today marks the opening of the 70th Commission on the Status of Women, the largest intergovernmental forum dedicated to promoting gender equality, we wish to reaffirm our strong support for the presence of the United Nations in Afghanistan and for the full renewal of UNAMA's mandate. The rights of Afghan women and girls, their dignity and full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation remain indispensable to peace, stability, and prosperity in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Any questions?
No, because they're talking about unfortunately that's not actually a good observation.
The 10,116th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Afghanistan. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Afghanistan, India, and the Islamic Republic of Iran to participate in the meeting. It's so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Georgette Gagnon, Deputy SRSG for Afghanistan, Officer in Charge of UNAMA, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. Now the Security Council will begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I give the floor to Ms. Georgette Gagnon.
Mr. President, the Council's ambition for Afghanistan, affirmed in Resolution 2721 of 2023, is a country at peace with itself and its neighbors, fully reintegrated into the international community and meeting international obligations, including on women's rights, human rights, and counterterrorism. This goal and the preservation of stability in Afghanistan is even more important in view of recent developments. The conflict with Pakistan has had punishing human and economic costs. We reiterate the Secretary General's deep concern about the escalation and impact on civilian populations, his call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, and for the two countries to resolve any differences through diplomacy. We urge both sides to recommit to a ceasefire without delay and safeguard the protection of civilians. I also reiterate our request to ensure the free flow of humanitarian assistance into Afghanistan. Currently, it is difficult to predict the outcome of the conflict in the Middle East, but it is already affecting Afghanistan. With the border closed between Afghanistan and Pakistan, Iran provided an alternative trade route that is now also increasingly uncertain due to the ongoing conflict. The prices of basic commodities in Afghanistan have begun to rise, stressing Afghanistan's already fragile economy. Instability in the region on both of Afghanistan's longest borders undermines Afghanistan's stability. We stress, however, that Afghanistan's continued alienation from the international system remains the central issue. It prevents other issues such as economic self-sufficiency, security cooperation, counterterrorism commitments, human rights concerns, and the humanitarian crisis from being fully addressed. If these issues are not dealt with, Afghanistan could again become a driver of regional and global instability in the form of outmigration, terrorism, narcotics, and more. Mr. President, within this increasingly complex context, at the request of this Council and in accordance with the recommendations of the November 2023 Independent Assessment, UNAMA has sought to advance a political pathway to create the conditions to achieve the desired end state. This engagement through the Doha process is one in which the interests and the concerns of all, the Afghan people, the international community, and the de facto authorities can be fairly discussed. It balances necessary pragmatism and patience with adherence to the UN's core principles. It has maintained existing channels for constructive engagement and opened new ones, and ensured that the rights, well-being, and aspirations of the Afghan people remain front and center of our efforts. This engagement process is also a recognition that the situation in Afghanistan remains a multilateral challenge that requires a multilateral solution. And it requires the full weight and engagement of this Council and the member states of the UN. Before outlining the country's multiple challenges, several positive developments speak to the value of this engagement and opportunities ahead. One of the tasks mandated to UNAMA is to support Afghanistan's economic and social stability and resilience. Through the UN's coordination of international assistance, the Afghan people have been supported to better endure compounding crises, from successive droughts to frequent earthquakes, from food insecurity to the return of millions of refugees. The de facto authorities' ban on opium poppy cultivation, a long-standing demand of the international community, has also been maintained for the past 3 years, despite the huge cost to rural livelihoods. The latest UNODC survey results show the land given over to opium poppy cultivation in 2025 was just 10,200 hectares, 20% lower than in 2024, and a minimal fraction of the pre-ban levels recorded in 2022. More support from the international community is needed to maintain the gains made on counter-narcotics. Despite sanctions and limited revenues, the de facto authorities have initiated large-scale infrastructure projects that could contribute to Afghanistan's economic development if they can be completed. The country has also absorbed 5.5 million Afghans returning from neighboring countries since September 2023, with declining international assistance and without evident social breakdown. These developments have fed into constructive engagements in our political efforts. The working groups on counter-narcotics and enabling the private sector, which complement the broader Doha process, have achieved results. We've seen more robust expert exchanges, greater transparency, and the unlocking of more resources to support the Afghan people. The private sector is also one of the few areas where there is some space for Afghan women to exercise their initiative and independence. Mr. President, despite these developments, decisions of the de facto authorities and resulting alienation of Afghanistan from the international community undermines their declared efforts to achieve economic self-sufficiency. The policies the de facto authorities have imposed on the Afghan people, particularly on education for girls and women, have the effect of depleting the country's substantial human capital over the medium and long term. It remains an extraordinary act of harm against not only Afghan women and girls, but all Afghan people. The humanitarian situation is taxing the resilience of Afghan communities. Since 2021, international partners have responded generously to address urgent humanitarian needs. This year, however, the humanitarian crisis is worsened by significant funding cuts, growing needs, including due to large-scale return of refugees, and policies of the de facto authorities that prioritize ideological rigidity over the well-being of the Afghan people. Restrictions on women working in the humanitarian sector is one clear example. Major urban centers are stretched far beyond their capacity. Years of economic deterioration and recurrent climate shocks have left families with less ability to cope and are driving new outmigration and secondary displacement. In 2026, humanitarian partners plan to reach 17.5 million Afghans through a humanitarian appeal of US dollars 1.71 billion. This places Afghanistan second globally in terms of people targeted and sixth globally on total funding requirements. This appeal is only 10% funded at present. The United Nations' ability to deliver assistance and reach Afghan women is impeded by a now 6-month ban on UN female national personnel being able to report for duty at their places of work. Their absence deprives the UN of their skills and experience and reduces our ability to provide vital support to Afghan women and the wider community. The restrictions are also a breach of international rules on the privileges and immunities of UN personnel and a violation of the UN Charter. We again urge the de facto authorities to lift these restrictions and allow our UN national female staff to return to their offices. The de facto authorities continue to be selective in their acceptance of the Afghan state's international obligations and display unwillingness to address key areas of concern. The unacceptable situation for Afghan women and girls continues. They are now entering their 5th year of almost total exclusion from public life and from education past grade 6. On girls' education, there are ways forward, and we urge the de facto authorities to resolve this issue. Their own decree suspending girls' education states that it is temporary until conditions permit. The international community is prepared to help create permissible conditions. This is a bridge that can be crossed. It would be hugely beneficial to Afghan society, to Afghan women and girls, now and into the future. It would send a positive signal to the world. Similarly, the recent Decree number 12 on criminal rules of courts further distances the Afghan people from realization of their human rights and the country's international obligations, and undermines hopes for a system that is responsive to people's needs and more inclusive of Afghanistan's diversity, with women and men treated as equals. The decree is discriminatory against women and religious minorities. Its vague wording opens the potential for misinterpretation and abuse. The decree, like the ban on girls' education, is another distressing sign that Afghanistan's leadership is indifferent to the concerns of the international community and the Afghan people. The de facto authorities also have a way to go to convince the world they are serious about meeting their counterterrorism commitments. While de facto authorities have been generally effective in combating ISIL-K, Afghanistan's neighbors continue to express concerns about extremism emanating from Afghanistan, in particular from groups affiliated with the de facto authorities, as detailed in the reports of the sanctions monitoring team. The unresolved issue between Afghanistan and Pakistan regarding the TTP has now led to an active conflict on the border between the two countries, which has included airstrikes in Afghan cities. More broadly, the potential threat of terrorism coming from Afghanistan remains a critical issue that concerns and unites the international community. Mr. President, we are grateful for the expressions of support to UNAMA from this Council. Even more valuable and necessary is the continued attention and consensus of this Council and its active engagement on Afghanistan. The United Nations is the convener of the Doha process, but it is the member states that can best demonstrate and provide the incentives for reintegration. And it is the de facto authorities that must do more through their actions to show they are ready and interested in achieving this end state. We look forward to renewal of our mandate next week, at a time marked by instability across the wider region, and the continued backing of the Council is vital to reinforce avenues for principled and pragmatic engagement, considering Afghanistan's key role in regional and global stability. UNAMA, with all UN agencies, funds, and programs, remains fully committed to advancing our shared objective articulated at the beginning of this briefing: an Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbors, reintegrated into the international system, and meeting its international obligations for the benefit of the Afghan people. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Gagnon for her briefing. I now shall make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the United States. Colleagues, it has been 4 long, frankly painful years since the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, and it should not surprise anyone that the situation is dire. The Taliban, through their policies, inflict constant and consistent hardship and suffering on the people of Afghanistan, limiting access to the very basic services and rights, perpetuating human rights abuses, including unconscionable and frankly disgusting restrictions on the exercise of women's rights. These oppressive policies have led to humanitarian disaster and economic crisis. And through all of this, the international community, including several countries represented today in this room, has sought to provide assistance in support of the Afghan people. Meanwhile, the Taliban have continued to impede that support. They've continued to manipulate that support. They've solidified their indifference regarding the well-being of the Afghan people. And unfortunately, the Taliban continue to engage in hostage diplomacy, and they continue to impede the function of UNAMA, including, as noted by the Deputy SRSG, by preventing Afghan female staff from entering United Nations premises across the country. The Taliban's actions demonstrate bad faith, and their actions have made us deeply skeptical of their willingness to meet their international commitments or respect Afghanistan's international obligations. This concern applies certainly to the Doha process. While the United States continues to participate in the process and its working groups, we doubt the Taliban's motives. We cannot build confidence with a group that continues to detain innocent Americans and ignores the basic needs of the Afghan people. Colleagues, in light of the Taliban's intransigence, we must carefully evaluate the utility of international assistance and engagement in Afghanistan. UNAMA's budget is the largest of any special political mission in the world, even after a reduction in its 2026 budget by 15%. This council must consider carefully the funds we collectively provide for this mission's budget when the mission's female national staff are not even able to go into the office to work. The Deputy SRSG cited a $1 billion shortfall, a requirement for humanitarian aid. I would submit that perhaps the international community would be more willing to fill that shortfall if the Taliban were not excluding half of its own population from basic rights. and responsibilities. The United States' top priority in Afghanistan remains the protection of U.S. citizens and of the U.S. homeland, which includes mitigating terrorist threats emanating from Afghanistan and securing the release of all those unjustly detained. We welcome last month's renewal of the mandate for the monitoring team for UN Security Council sanctions on the Taliban. Within the UN Security Council, we must condemn the Taliban for its engagement in hostage diplomacy and, again, for the disregard of the well-being of the Afghan people. Colleagues, the United States and dozens of countries dedicated and devoted billions of dollars of time and treasure and the lives of its citizens to improve Afghanistan's future. This council must continue to demand responsible actions from the Taliban. The people of Afghanistan deserve no less. I thank you. I will resume my function as president of the council. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Baroness Jackie Smith, Minister of State, Minister for Women and Equalities of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Deputy SRSG Gagnon, for your insightful briefing this afternoon. Colleagues, let me first begin by expressing the United Kingdom's deep concern at the intensification of the Taliban's repression. We're appalled by the continued restrictions imposed on the women and girls of Afghanistan, including the ban preventing Afghan women from accessing UN spaces. Millions are being systematically excluded from society. As we heard from Afghan student Sunbul Rayhan in the opening session of the Commission on the Status of Women this morning, this is not an abstract concept, but a devastating infringement of women's rights, opportunities, and dreams, and it cannot continue. As we mark the beginning of the Commission on the Status of Women here at the UN, the United Kingdom stands in solidarity with the women and girls of Afghanistan, who deserve full, meaningful, and equal participation in all areas of life. We're dismayed by the Taliban's new criminal procedures directive, which legitimises domestic violence, embeds religious discrimination, and targets women and minorities. These oppressive measures must be rescinded. As my Foreign Secretary has said, the rights of all Afghans must be protected. Second, the United Kingdom is deeply concerned by the significant escalation in tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan. We call for de-escalation and re-engagement in mediated dialogue. Finally, the United Kingdom is a long-standing and major donor to Afghanistan, providing over $200 million this financial year for vital life-saving and basic services support to the country's most vulnerable people, especially women and girls. We're therefore deeply dismayed by the Taliban's refusal to allow essential health and nutrition supplies over the border into Afghanistan. This is having a severe impact on the delivery of aid. It is vital that these goods are allowed to enter Afghanistan without obstruction and without delay. 22 million people across the country remain in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Colleagues, progress in Afghanistan requires the Taliban to engage meaningfully in the UN process. This is the path towards the goal which we collectively agreed in Resolution 2721 of an Afghanistan that is at peace with itself and its neighbours, fully reintegrated into the international community and meeting its international obligations. The United Kingdom supports the efforts of UN leadership and UNAMA in this regard, and looks forward to continuing to work together with our international and regional partners to this end. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Baroness Jackie Smith for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席。
Thank you, President. I thank Deputy Special Representative Gagnon for her briefing and appreciates the effort of UNAMA to help Afghanistan rebuild, develop, and engage in dialogue with the international community. At present, Afghanistan is facing multiple challenges, including humanitarian development, counterterrorism, and human rights challenges. The Afghan government and all parties concerned should work together to promote the stabilization and development in Afghanistan and its early integration into the international community. I wish to make the following points. First, improving people's livelihood is a top priority. In Afghanistan, there are still nearly 22 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, with more than 30 million people living on less than $1 a day. Explosive remnants of war continues to cause civilian casualties, while the return of millions of refugees and frequent natural disasters further exacerbate the humanitarian crisis and development challenges facing the country. Regrettably, some countries have drastically reduced or even halted their assistance to Afghanistan, forcing many relief programs of the UN and international humanitarian agencies to shut down last year. As a result, problems such as food insecurity, public health challenges, and malnutrition among children and pregnant women have become even more severe. We call on traditional donors, especially those countries that bear historical responsibility for Afghanistan, to immediately resume and increase assistance and to translate their concerns for the Afghan people into concrete action. The overseas assets of Afghanistan's central bank belong to the Afghan people. Relevant countries should return them in full and lift illegal unilateral sanctions on the country. China welcomes multiple meetings held by working groups on private sector development and counter-narcotics under the Doha process and the positive progress achieved. We support these working groups in playing a positive role in improving Afghanistan's financial system and promoting alternative livelihood, thereby helping Afghanistan strengthen its capacity for self-sustained development. Second, it is imperative to safeguard the basic rights and interests of the people. In recent years, Afghan girls have not been able to receive modern education beyond the 6th grade, and women's basic rights and interests, such as employment, access to healthcare, public services, and participation in social life, have become increasingly restricted. This not only harms the physical and mental well-being of Afghan women, but also does not contribute to social stability or economic development. We hope the Afghan authorities will demonstrate openness, inclusiveness, and a sense of responsibility by listening to the legitimate aspirations of their people and the reasonable concerns of the international community, promptly adjusting relevant policies and effectively safeguarding the basic rights of all people, including women, so as to gain greater trust and support from the international community. The prolonged inability of Afghan female staff members of the UN to return to their posts has directly affected the effectiveness of the international assistance to Afghanistan. We call on the Afghan authorities to lift the ban as soon as possible and facilitate the work of the UN agencies in the country. Third, eliminating terrorism is the foundation of security. According to the UN reports, terrorist groups such as ISIL-K, Al-Qaeda, ETIM, TTP, and BLA remain active in Afghanistan, posing serious threats to Afghanistan and its neighboring countries. In January this year, a terrorist attack on a Chinese restaurant in Kabul caused multiple casualties, including Chinese nationals. China strongly condemns and firmly opposes terrorism in all its forms and urges the Afghan authorities to conduct thorough investigation to establish the facts ASAP and bring the perpetrators to justice. We call on the Afghan side to recognize the grave harm posed by terrorism strengthen counterterrorism cooperation with regional countries, and resolutely eliminate all terrorist forces operating from Afghan territory in order to maintain regional stability and security. The recent escalation of conflicts between Pakistan and Afghanistan has caused heavy casualties on both sides. China is deeply concerned and saddened by this development. We call on both sides to remain calm and exercise restraint, realize ceasefire as soon as possible, and properly resolve the differences through dialogue and negotiation. China has been actively mediating the Pakistan and Afghanistan tensions through its own channels, and we stand ready to continue playing a constructive role in easing the situation and improving relations between the two countries. President, Afghanistan has endured decades of conflicts and turmoil, and its people long for peace and stability. Addressing the multiple challenges facing Afghanistan requires continued engagement and dialogue between the international community and Afghan authorities, with goodwill and sincerity from all sides to find effective ways to address each other's concerns. China welcomes the recent visit of USG DiCarlo to Afghanistan and supports continued constructive engagement between the UN and Afghanistan. We look forward to more substantive progress in the Doha process. The Security Council should adapt to the evolving situation and adjust the 1988 sanctions regime in a timely manner, particularly by resuming the package of travel ban exemptions, ASAP, to facilitate engagement and dialogue. The mandate of UNAMA will expire in mid-March. As the penholder on Afghanistan in the Security Council, China will work to build consensus among Council members and support the smooth renewal of UNAMA's mandate so that the mission can continue to play a positive role in advancing political settlement of the Afghan issue and promoting long-lasting peace and stability in Afghanistan. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Russia.
Mr. President, we thank the Deputy Head of the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, Georgette Gagnon, for the assessment of the situation in Afghanistan that we just heard. Russia consistently has been supporting the efforts of UNAMA within the framework of the mandate it has, and we expect that there will be an increasing level of mutual trust between the Afghan government and the UN personnel. We have taken note of the report of the Secretary General on the situation in the country, and we would like to note the following. Despite the gloomy forecasts by Western states after the irresponsible withdrawal of foreign troops, Afghanistan has stood firm. The bet of the Afghan authorities on the development of a multifaceted regional cooperation aimed at building an independent and self-reliant state is already bringing in tangible results. It is obvious that despite all of the difficulties and the suffocating sanctions, painstaking work is being done to solve the problems accumulated over the years of occupation. But this is not a fast process. A country that for 20 years was on international assistance now more than ever needs our joint depoliticized support. Mr. President, Russia has consistently advocated and continues to advocate the development of a realistic, comprehensive approach in relation to Afghanistan. Its basis in objective analysis and a balanced assessment of the situation in the country. This is an imperative for which has no alternative and will have none. The key components here are genuinely constructive engagement on the part of the international community on the Afghan question, full consideration of the needs of the Afghans themselves, and a trust-based dialogue with the Taliban on all issues. And the success of such a dialogue depends entirely on the readiness of both sides for it, with a complete rejection at the same time of exerting pressure and blackmail. Such as depoliticized and comprehensive approach is shared by all regional players without exception. First of all, the participants of the Moscow format and its regional quartet, as well as the CSTO and the SCO, including the CSTO Working Group on Afghanistan and the SCO Afghanistan Contact Group. Generally speaking, a pragmatic attitude is also embedded in the mosaic approach, which is promoted by UNAMA. At its core is engagement with the Taliban on all key problems, including diplomatic representation, lifting of sanctions, unfreezing of assets, combating terrorism and narcotics threats, and the protection of human rights. The key to Afghanistan's international reintegration lies in solving these issues in a timely manner and without preconditions. But attempts to promote a selective approach with an emphasis on those issues that Western donors are ready to discuss will not lead to the desired result and will only further delay prospects for resolving the Afghan issue. Against this background, it is regrettable that some Western donors have still not learned lessons from their past mistakes and still do not recognize the advantages of a broad dialogue with the Afghan authorities. They stubbornly speak to the Taliban in the language of ultimatums and impose on the UN, especially UNAMA, their line, which is doomed to failure. Colleagues, you cannot fail to realize, certainly, that through your actions you will jeopardize the future of the mission as a whole. It is hardly reasonable to expect that the Afghan authorities will be interested in maintaining a UN presence whose task will be just to serve the interests of the foreign interventionists expelled in August 2021. We also address the Secretary General, from whom we all expect the swift, soon appointment of a new head of UNAMA. And we expect that in searching for the most appropriate candidates, you will not only consult with the Security Council members, but also take into account the opinion of the Afghan authorities themselves. Ultimately, effective implementation of the mission's mandate will depend on their consent. Mr. President, we share the assessments of the UN Secretary General on the internal political situation in Afghanistan. We are concerned by the sharp escalation of armed clashes between Afghanistan and Pakistan, both friendly countries. We are convinced of the imperative of returning the situation to a political and diplomatic channel. We are ready to provide our friends with assistance and support. We also look forward to seeing the resumption of a mutually beneficial interaction between them, including on the issues of combating terrorism. Concern here is caused also by the persistent presence of the ISIL Khorasan group. We see that the government is making serious efforts to combat terrorist threats, but unfortunately they are insufficient. Terrorists use any pretext, any opportunity to destabilize the situation in Afghanistan and beyond. ISIL fighters continue to receive external financial support and continue recruiting new members. The economic challenges in the country and armed clashes in border areas also serve their interests. And our close attention is the terrorist activity of foreign terrorist fighters who received experience in Syria and Iraq. And the situation is also worsened by the unclear fate of the weapons which were abandoned by NATO forces. Closely connected to the terrorism is a drug problem. We pay tribute to the achievements of the Taliban in combating opium poppy cultivation. However, it's too early to relax. Production of synthetic drugs in local Afghan laboratories is increasing. The efforts of the Afghan authorities alone are not enough. Wide international assistance is necessary to eradicate the drug threat, including through UNODC. The Russian Federation pays great attention to the socioeconomic situation in the country. And we note the selfless efforts of humanitarian agencies and their staff who are ready under difficult conditions to continue providing assistance to Afghans in need. We call on UNAMA to engage in its direct tasks to intensify efforts to unfreeze assets and facilitate development. And we address Western donors. If you truly, not in word but in deed, want to help the women and girls of Afghanistan, then assist in creating conditions for their lives in a stable and developed country. And this is especially important given the possible new wave of refugees who will be forced to return from neighboring Iran amid the armed aggression against it by Israel and the United States. Russia, on a permanent basis, provides assistance to the people of Afghanistan. We are committed to developing partnership ties with this country in all areas, including the area of regional security. We are interested in strengthening Afghanistan's trade and economic potential and dialogue with the representatives of local businesses within the framework of specialized forums my country is organizing. We closely monitor the developments regarding the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the inalienable rights to education and work for all Afghans without distinction based on ethnicity, religion, or gender. We monitor the dynamics and trends in forming a truly inclusive government with the participation of all ethnic and political groups in the country, and expect to see progress on these two tracks. Mr. President, the Russian Federation does sincerely support the aspiration of the Afghan people to live in a peaceful and prosperous country free of drugs and terrorism. The development of the situation in Afghanistan is something that will, to a great degree, determine the stability of the situation in the region as a whole. We call on the UN to ensure interaction with those Afghans who truly represent the real authorities and who indeed bear responsibility for what is happening in the country. It is only in this way that the existing problems can be resolved in Afghanistan and Afghanistan can become truly integrated into the international community. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Russia for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the Deputy Special Representative for her briefing and commend UNAMA and all UN personnel in Afghanistan for their continued service under challenging conditions. Yesterday, the international community marked International Women's Day, reaffirming our collective commitment to gender equality and human rights. In Afghanistan, however, that commitment remains painfully out of reach. Allow me to raise 3 points. First, Denmark remains gravely concerned by the appalling human rights situation in Afghanistan. When the Taliban seized power in 2021, many feared a rollback in rights. Few could have imagined the scale, speed, and systematic repression that has followed, especially for women and girls. The recent Criminal Procedures Directive represents another step by the Taliban to entrench this trajectory. It reinforces discrimination, enables violence against women and children, and further restricts freedom of expression. This morning, we marked the opening of the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women under the theme of ensuring and strengthening access to justice for all women and girls. This could not be more urgent in Afghanistan, where a woman might face 3 months in prison for visiting her family without permission, while a man who breaks her bones risked only 15 days behind bars. This is not justice. It is codified discrimination and a clear violation of Afghanistan's international obligations. We must not allow such a systemic erosion of rights to become normalized. The rights of Afghan women and girls are universal and non-negotiable. Denmark demands that the Taliban immediately reverse this directive and other restrictive measures, including the ban on women's access to medical education. We also urge the Taliban to lift the ban of Afghan female UN staff without delay. The UN cannot serve the Afghan people effectively while its female staff are barred for their workplaces. Second, Mr. President, Afghanistan remains in the grip of a profound humanitarian crisis. Widespread food insecurity and alarming levels of child malnutrition persist. Climate-driven drought and water scarcity are worsening shortages and deepening vulnerabilities, especially for women and children. At the same time, women and girls continue to face significant barriers in accessing essential services, including healthcare and nutrition. Broader regional tensions raise further concern for civilian protection, displacement, and humanitarian access. The Taliban must ensure safe, sustained, and unhindered access for humanitarian workers across the country, including by guaranteeing the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women. We also stress the need to scale up support to the humanitarian response plan for Afghanistan, which, as we heard, remains significantly underfunded. Third, Mr. President, the recent escalation between Afghanistan and Pakistan is deeply worrying. Afghan territory must never be used to threaten or attack any country. We underline the importance of effective and sustained action against all terrorist groups operating in or from Afghanistan, including ISIL-K and TTP. Rather than providing cover, the Taliban must live up to its public promise to combat terrorist elements. The increase in cross-border attacks and reported strikes risk further destabilizing an already fragile region. Denmark echoes the Secretary-General in calling for an immediate cessation of violence and for all parties to exercise restraint and pursue de-escalation through dialogue. All parties must fully respect their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, and ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure at all times. In closing, Mr. President, Denmark supports an integrated and principled international approach to Afghanistan. The Doha process continues to provide an important framework for engagement, but it must remain anchored in clear principles and Afghanistan's human rights obligation. As we approach the renewal of UNAMA's mandate, let me reiterate Denmark's strong support for the mission. In a context of deepening human rights violations, humanitarian crisis, and regional tensions, UNAMA remains indispensable. Denmark stands ready to work with all Council members to secure a strong UNAMA mandate and to support the Afghan people in the pursuit of dignity, human rights, and lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Deputy Special Representative for Afghanistan, Ms. Georgette Gagnon, for her briefing. And we recognize the crucial work done by the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. We welcome to the Chamber Her Excellency Baroness Jackie Smith, Minister of State of the United Kingdom, and we also welcome to the Chamber representatives of the countries that do us the honour of participating in this meeting today. Panama notes with grave concern the worsening of the situation for women and girls in Afghanistan. The persistent restrictions placed on girls' access to secondary and higher education, together with the provisions recently adopted by the de facto authorities through new national legislation, raise serious questions about the social and economic future of the country. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, this new normative framework incorporates into the national legal order restrictions which directly affect women and girls. These include provisions which limit their freedom of movement, erode the protections they enjoyed against domestic violence, and ratchet up mechanisms for moral control within the family environment. These provisions institutionalize patterns of discrimination which are incompatible with Afghanistan's international obligations in the field of human rights. These provisions also compromise the country's prospects for development because no society can thrive when half of its population remains excluded from education, employment, and public life. These restrictions also affect the functioning of the United Nations system in the country. The ban which forbids Afghan women from working in United Nations offices, constitutes unjustified discrimination. Discrimination which stymies the implementation of UNAMA's mandate and undermines its ability to provide effective assistance to Afghanistan's people. President, the threat of terrorism remains one of the most serious challenges to the stability of Afghanistan and of the region. The most recent report of the Secretary General documents the presence and activity of terrorist groups such as ISIL-K and TTP, among others. These groups continue to represent a significant threat both for civilians and for the security of Afghanistan, and for the security of neighbouring countries and of the region in general. The persistence of these threats lays bare the crucial importance of ensuring that Afghanistan does not become an arena which enables the operation of terrorist groups. Some states in the region, such as Pakistan, are already directly weathering the consequences of this threat. Consequently, preventing the scenario outlined above requires sustained efforts and decisive international cooperation. Panama is of the view that the fight against terrorism is a shared responsibility because no country is ever entirely safe from this threat. Terrorism is our common enemy, and our response must be rooted in the principle of the responsible cooperation between states. Finally, President Panama believes that Afghanistan's future must be built in such a way as to avoid the country once again descending into a cycle of violence and widespread conflict. We must tackle the root causes of the fragility Afghanistan continues to face. The only way of forging ahead along this path is for the de facto authorities to demonstrate a will to engage constructively with the international community. They must guarantee conditions which allow Afghanistan to move towards a more inclusive, stable, and peaceful environment. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama. I give the floor to the representative of the DRC.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the A3 countries, namely Liberia, Somalia, and my own country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We thank the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for Afghanistan and Officer in charge of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, Ms. Georgette Gagnon. We thank her for a comprehensive briefing. We also would like to welcome the presence here of Baroness Jackie Smith, Minister of State from the United Kingdom. Mr. President, the A3 remain concerned by the complex political, humanitarian, and socioeconomic challenges facing Afghanistan. The Afghan people continue to endure the consequences of prolonged instability. In addition to that, there is economic hardship and limited access to basic services. The A3 reaffirmed the importance of sustained international engagement in support of the Afghan people. And in this regard, the A3 would like to highlight the following points. First, the A3 group reiterates its strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national unity of Afghanistan. Second, the A3 reiterates its unfailing support for the continued work of UNAMA, as we at the same time underscore the critical role played by UNAMA as a key platform for international engagement and coordination of humanitarian and development efforts in Afghanistan. And with this in mind, we emphasize the importance of ensuring that the mission is able to operate under conditions that allow it to effectively carry out its mandate, including through safe and unhindered access for United Nations personnel and partners. Third, the A3 expresses its deep concern over the worsening humanitarian situation in Afghanistan as the cumulative effects of declining international assistance, large-scale return of displaced populations, natural disasters, and disruptions in regional trade continue to exert immense pressure on Afghan communities. The A3 is gravely alarmed by the sharp deterioration in food security, with 21.9 million people projected to need humanitarian assistance in 2026. The Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan for 2026 calls for 1.71 billion to provide critical life-saving support. And the A3 commends the persistent efforts of the United Nations and humanitarian partners working under extremely difficult conditions and urges donors to act swiftly to close the funding gaps. Fourth, the A3 considers that the full participation of women and girls is a cornerstone for Afghanistan's successful reintegration into the international community. We emphasize the fact that ensuring access to education, employment, fundamental freedoms, and meaningful participation in society will unlock the nation's full potential and uphold the dignity of its people. The A3 is also concerned by restrictions which prevent United Nations Afghan female personnel from accessing United Nations premises. In this regard, we call on the authorities to permit United Nations female personnel to return to their place of work. Fifth, the A3 remains concerned by the continued threats presented by terrorist groups operating within Afghanistan and reaffirms that its territory should not be used as a platform for terrorist activities which jeopardize regional and international peace and security. Furthermore, the A3 urges countries of the region to intensify support for efforts to address and counter threats from terrorist organizations operating in Afghan territory. In this regard, the A3 underlined the importance of the Security Council sanctions regime concerning Afghanistan and reiterates their support for the work of the 1988 Sanctions Committee. Sixth, the A3 reiterates that engagement between the international community and Afghanistan is crucial for Afghanistan's sustainable peace, stability, and social and economic development. We note the Secretary General's call on all members of the Doha process and the Afghan authorities to further engage in the proposed comprehensive approach as envisaged by Security Council Resolution 2721 of 2023 towards the objective of an Afghanistan fully reintegrated into the international community. To conclude, Mr. President, we stress the importance of a coordinated and integrated approach amongst political, humanitarian, and development actors in order to better address the multiple challenges facing the Afghan people. The A3 reaffirms its steadfast solidarity with the people of Afghanistan and our commitment to help them in their pursuit of lasting peace, security, stability, and sustainable development. I thank you.
I thank the representative of DRC for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président.
President, I wish first and foremost to thank the Deputy Special Representative of Afghanistan, Ms. Georgette Gagnon. Today, we saw the opening of the CSW. France at this time wishes to express its unwavering solidarity with Afghan women and girls. France firmly condemns the Taliban's continuation of their systematic policy violating the rights of women and girls. The new so-called decree on the criminal rules of courts makes women second-class citizens by stripping them almost of their status as human beings. It's a new illustration, an unacceptable one indeed, of the Taliban's continued violations of their rights. This decree, if it can really be called a decree, further entrenches the codification of gender segregation practiced by the Taliban. The systematic violations of women's rights constitute gender persecution, a crime against humanity pursuant to the Rome Statute. These inhumane acts cannot go unpunished. The Taliban's violations of their international obligations are also being seen in the fight against terrorism. The Afghan territory continues to be used by terrorist groups to wage attacks against countries in the region and beyond. In accordance with Council Resolution 2593, France calls upon the Taliban to take concrete measures to combat terrorism, in particular Daesh al-Khorasan, Al-Qaeda, and the TTP. In view of these developments, the international community must candidly ask itself whether its engagement strategy and its long-term goals are really effective. Since the launch of the Doha process more than 3 years ago, the Taliban has responded to our engagement only with more provocations and more violations of international obligations and of the resolutions of this Council. No, France is not closing the door on dialogue, but we refuse to abandon the Afghan men and women. We continue to support Afghan men and women by providing them with humanitarian aid in accordance with the principle for and by women, and we do that despite the fact that humanitarian workers are working in very fragile conditions. However, the international community must not lose sight of the goal of the Doha dialogue. That is, an Afghanistan living in peace with its neighbours and one which respects the rights of all Afghan women and men. Let us recall that measures taken as part of the Doha process must be commensurate with the loftiness of that goal and the seriousness of the situation. President, France commends the work of UNAMA and that of all the agencies, funds and programs of the United Nations present in the country. We support UNAMA in the implementation of all of its mandate in all of its facets, including the facilitation of an inclusive political process and human rights protection. We welcome the recent visit made by the USG to Kabul to convey firm messages to the Taliban regarding the demands of the international community. The ban on Afghan women employees from them accessing UN processes was opposed by the Taliban 6 months ago and is unacceptable. These restrictions prevent UNAMA from implementing the mandate bestowed upon it by this Security Council. It's up to this Council to ensure that its resolutions are respected, beginning with resolutions 2593 and 2681. Finally, France calls for the expeditious appointment of a new SRSG. We reiterate our support for UNAMA as it discharges its political mandate. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to thank the United States of America, the President of the Council for this month, for convening this meeting. I also thank Ms. Georgette Gagnon, Deputy Special Representative for Afghanistan, Officer in charge of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, for her work and her valuable briefing. Mr. President, humanitarian, economic, human rights, and security challenges intersect in Afghanistan today with direct implications for regional stability. The Secretary General's latest report makes clear that these challenges are worsening amid a deteriorating human rights situation, particularly the rights of women and girls, as well as a decline in international assistance, large-scale return of population, natural disasters, and continuing terrorist threats and attacks. This situation requires a comprehensive response that addresses the root causes of the crisis and mitigates its cross-border repercussions. The report also highlights the continued systematic discrimination against women and girls, their deprivation of the right to work and education, as the education ban approaches its 5th year. The Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms that lifting the restrictions imposed on women and girls is an indispensable step toward promoting stability and recovery. Additionally, the report notes that the restrictions preventing Afghan national female UN staff members from accessing their workplaces, these restrictions have now entered their 6th month. These restrictions undermine the mission's ability to implement its mandate and are inconsistent with the Charter of the United Nations. The Kingdom of Bahrain calls for their immediate removal. Mr. President, humanitarian needs remain immense. The report indicates that more than 21 million people will require humanitarian assistance in 2026. It also indicates that nearly 17 million people are facing acute food insecurity. The Kingdom of Bahrain calls for sustainable and flexible international support to ensure the continuation of essential services and the protection of the most vulnerable groups in a manner that promotes stability and reduces cross-border risks, including those posed by terrorist organizations. In light of the recent escalation between Afghanistan and Pakistan, we call on all parties to exercise restraint, prioritize dialogue and diplomacy, and avoid further escalation to spare both peoples the scourge of conflict. In conclusion, the Kingdom of Bahrain underscores the importance of the role played by UNAMA as the main united presence in Afghanistan and its role in facilitating a coordinated and effective international engagement through the Doha process. In this regard, we commend the efforts of the State of Qatar in hosting this process and its continued support, contributing to advancing dialogue and enhancing regional coordination. We also welcome positive indicators of a decline in the cultivation of poppy and stress the importance of supporting alternative livelihoods and licit economy in ways that promote the development of the Afghan community and curb the illicit drug-related economy. The Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms its commitment to supporting international efforts aimed at achieving security, stability, and prosperity in Afghanistan and ensuring that it remains free of terrorism in support of international peace and security. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the floor. It has been more than 4 years since the Taliban came to power. It was hoped that the Taliban would transform and evolve into a responsible governing entity and lead their country into a new era of peace and prosperity with good neighborliness and adherence to international obligations. As an immediate neighbor, in order to secure a peaceful and stable Afghanistan, Pakistan regularly facilitated dialogue and engagement with the Taliban authorities. And last year, for example, we had a series of high-level visits to Kabul, presenting a number of initiatives assisting in humanitarian relief efforts, offering bilateral trade incentives, liberalized visa regime, transit concessions, and participating in regional platforms to help Afghanistan integrate with the region and beyond. And to recall here that to facilitate direct dialogue, the international community had also extended an olive branch to the Taliban during the Doha III process with the expectation that they would deliver on 3 key international demands, that is, counterterrorism, human rights, and inclusive governance. And I think it's clear from today's discussion also that regrettably they have failed to deliver on all 3 counts. Madam President, today Afghanistan is a sanctuary for terrorist groups and proxies, a reality acknowledged by global assessments, including UN reports and UN monitoring team. This has destabilized the region with dire consequences and security challenges for its immediate neighbors, particularly Pakistan. Terrorism emanating from Afghan soil poses a grave threat not only to its immediate neighbors but also to the broader region and beyond, undermining regional and international peace and security. Terrorist entities including TTP, BLA, and its Majid Brigade, ISIL-K, Al-Qaeda, and ETIM enjoy safe havens inside Afghanistan, from where they launch cross-border infiltration, violent attacks, and suicide bombings. Elements within the Taliban regime have chosen the path of complicity and active support of these groups, with external backing and sponsorship of our eastern neighbor, a known opportunist and spoiler, providing logistical support and financing to wage a proxy war against Pakistan. Pakistan has since witnessed a surge in terrorist attacks, planned, financed, and orchestrated from Afghan soil under the Taliban regime's direct watch. We have lost thousands of lives to terrorism-related incidents since the Taliban takeover. And just last month, more than 175 innocent Pakistani lives were lost, including in 3 suicide attacks. We would like to warn that spillover effects of the terrorism nurturing in Afghanistan will not remain confined to Pakistan. Madam President, Pakistan has always prioritized dialogue. Numerous diplomatic efforts were made to counsel the Taliban and to convey our concerns. Recent mediation efforts facilitated by the sincere support of brotherly countries, particularly Qatar, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, also have not yielded the desired results. The Taliban's continued failure to undertake substantive action, their rigid reluctance to provide assurances and guarantees, and refusal of their leadership to publicly denounce and condemn terrorist groups such as the TTP and BLA highlights the scale of their complicity and active support. Terrorist groups are collaborating through joint training, illicit weapons acquisition, and coordinating attacks. But Pakistan will not sit idle while suffering from terrorist acts from across the Afghan border that target our border posts, law enforcement agencies, and civilian infrastructure, including public spaces of worship and schools. We have confiscated large caches of sophisticated military-grade modern equipment left behind by foreign forces in Afghanistan during our counterterrorism operations. Madam President, after showing maximum restraint, on 21st and 22nd of February, Pakistan carried out intelligence-based selective targeting of 7 terrorist camps and hideouts belonging to the TTP and its affiliates and the ISIL-K in the bordering regions with precision and accuracy. But on 26th February, the Taliban publicly declared their decision to initiate hostilities against Pakistan across multiple border locations with unprovoked firing and shelling of border posts and military installations. In exercise of its right to self-defense, Pakistan took retaliatory measures against hostile targets and logistical bases used by terrorist groups. Our actions have been proportional, based on careful planning with necessary due diligence and directed solely against identified terrorist camps and support bases. Pakistan will take all necessary defensive measures for the protection of its citizens, territory, and sovereignty. Our counterterrorism operations will continue for as long as it takes to degrade the combat capabilities of terrorist groups and support infrastructure. While UNAMA mentions the reported civilian casualties during cross-border clashes, it has not presented a realistic overview of Afghanistan's security dynamics and efforts to prevent illicit trade and destabilizing accumulation of small arms and light weapons and their diversion in Afghanistan and the region, as mandated by the Council. The presence of terrorist entities in Afghanistan cannot be delinked from the security situation. UNAMA's ability to accurately verify incidents of border clashes and reports of civilian casualties in an environment where access to areas outside Kabul is restricted and strictly monitored by the Taliban poses serious questions of credibility. Madam President, ordinary and vulnerable Afghans are suffering from Taliban's inhumane restrictions and misplaced priorities, sanctions, a dysfunctional banking system, drying up foreign aid, poverty, terrorism, narcotics, and human rights violations weigh heavily on Afghanistan's socio-economic landscape, a direct result of Taliban's reckless behavior. Continued restrictions on women and girls inside Afghanistan are inconsistent with Islamic traditions and norms of Muslim society. Pakistan fully shares the international community's concerns on human rights and the discriminatory treatment of women and girls. Increasing financing gaps in humanitarian needs and response plan for 2026, requiring $1.71 billion for basic needs, demonstrates lack of support for a regime that is willing to sacrifice the welfare of its people for its own flawed policies. Madam President, for over 4 decades, Pakistan welcomed millions of Afghan refugees despite constraints and inadequate international support, coping with the huge caseloads of illegal Afghans without documentation, posing a serious threat to our security. These were not meant to be indefinite stays. While we continue to extend all possible facilitation, the international community must shoulder its responsibility, share this burden, and uphold commitments which have been long delayed, unkept, and at times reversed. Shifting the blame of Afghanistan's woes to the inflow of returnees does not reflect ground realities either. Madam President, Pakistan has consistently advocated for sustained engagement with Afghanistan. We look forward to the next steps of the UN-led Doha process and action plan for its mosaic approach to address Afghanistan's multifaceted challenges comprehensively with well-defined objectives and a realistic roadmap as the only viable pathway to lasting peace in Afghanistan. Without reciprocity from the Afghan Taliban regime, we fear that we go nowhere. As immediate neighbors bound by geography with deep-rooted ties, cultural linkages, and fraternal bonds, no country desires peace and stability in Afghanistan more than Pakistan. And no country has suffered more from the consequences of decades of conflict and instability in Afghanistan than Pakistan. We wish to see a peaceful, stable, interconnected, and prosperous Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbors, a point also highlighted by the Deputy SRSG. Pakistan's demand from Afghanistan has always been singular and clear: verifiable and non-reversible action against terrorists. This demand remains unmet to date. The Taliban must first and foremost ensure that their territory is not used for terrorism against neighboring countries and take demonstrable steps to deny space to terrorist groups and proxies. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Deputy Special Representative Georgette Gagnon for her insightful remarks. Madam President, as we celebrate today International Women's Day and the opening of the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, our thoughts turn to the women and girls of Afghanistan who are suffering under Taliban rule for the 5th consecutive year. In a world striving towards equality, Afghan women are not merely being sidelined from society, they are being persecuted and systematically erased from public life. I would like to make the following 3 points. First, the restrictions preventing Afghan women, UN personnel from accessing their offices in effect since September 2025, coupled with the Taliban's December 2024 ban on medical education for women and girls, have pushed the healthcare and humanitarian sectors to the brink of collapse. We urge the Taliban to immediately lift these restrictions and also restore full access to education for girls beyond the 6th grade. Moreover, the restrictions on media freedom and freedom of expression are unacceptable, particularly concerning book censorship and social media monitoring. We are also deeply concerned by the rising incidence of corporal punishment, public executions, arbitrary arrests and detentions, extrajudicial killings, as well as torture and ill treatment of the Afghan population. The latest addition to the Taliban system of oppression, the Decree on Criminal Rules of Courts, or the so-called New Penal Code, not only codifies discriminatory provisions for different categories of citizens, but also explicitly deprives women of the last vestiges of legal protection. In view of the above, we support all means of accountability, including the recently established independent investigative mechanism for Afghanistan. At the same time, we reiterate our call on the Taliban to honor Afghanistan's international commitments, particularly the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Second, we share the Secretary General's concern over the recent cross-border clashes between the Taliban and Pakistani security forces, which have resulted in numerous civilian casualties, including women and children, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. We reiterate that the protection of civilians and strict adherence to international humanitarian law are of paramount importance. We call for a lasting cessation of hostilities through de-escalation, dialogue, and mediation of efforts. Moreover, the territory of Afghanistan should not be used to threaten or attack any country, and we call on the Taliban to take active measures to combat terrorism. At the same time, we call for the unhindered humanitarian access of aid destined to Afghanistan. As the country grapples with multiple humanitarian challenges, including acute food insecurity, recurring public health emergencies, and natural hazards, as well as unprecedented numbers of returnees, the continuation of hostilities poses a challenge to the effective delivery of life-saving assistance to the most vulnerable populations. Aid entering the country needs to be safely and expeditiously delivered across all of Afghanistan. Third, Greece reiterates its full support for UNAMA and the upcoming renewal of its mandate in its entirety, including provisions on human rights. At the same time, the proposed roadmap to foster a more coherent, coordinated, and structured engagement between the international community and the Taliban offers a clear path towards. However, its success depends on reciprocity. The recent visit of Under-Secretary General Di Carlo in Kabul is yet another testament to the international community's sincerity in this regard. It is now incumbent upon the Taliban to prove their good faith by upholding their international obligations and establishing the long-awaited mechanism to engage on UNAMA's comprehensive approach. Madam President, as Afghanistan experiences a period of fragile stability, let us remind the Taliban that sustainable economic recovery and international reintegration begin with the reintegration of women into Afghan society and the absolute respect for the human rights. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Gracias. Thank you, Madam President. I wish at the outset to thank the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Georgette Gagnon, for her report. I also welcome the delegations here with us today. The recent developments lay bare the complex challenges that remain in Afghanistan including the lack of truly inclusive governance and the persistent human rights violations. Colombia roundly condemns the systematic patterns of gender-based discrimination put into place and pursued by the de facto government. We wish to reaffirm that those acts constitute violations of international human rights law. The restrictions imposed by the de facto authorities have institutionalized structural barriers for women, young people, teenagers, and girls. These structural barriers have prevented them from effectively enjoying their rights to education, healthcare, and work. At the same time, these restrictions stymie freedom of movement, participation in public life, and access to justice. Moreover, we express our grave concern at the adoption of the decree on the criminal rules of courts. This decree increases the number of crimes that can incur the death penalty. It provides for the use of corporal punishment for myriad crimes and contains provisions which violate the freedom of religion and the freedom of expression. Moreover, that legislation fuels impunity for the perpetrators of gender-based violence because it eliminates punishment for acts which constitute gender-based violence. Madam President, it is unacceptable that the de facto authorities continue to prevent Afghan female UN staff from accessing UN facilities. This not only violates the rights and freedoms of women, it also undermines the ability to meet the humanitarian needs of women that continue to rise against a backdrop of scant resources. It has become particularly difficult to meet the needs of those women who are and have returned to Afghanistan. A large number of Afghan men and women have returned en masse to Afghanistan from neighbouring countries. With that in mind, we echo the Secretary General's appeal to guarantee that returns are voluntary, safe, dignified and supported to guarantee sustainable reintegration. The new cycles of violence in which schools are no longer safe spaces, particularly for children, and in which we are seeing attacks against hospitals, have made vast swathes of the returned population more vulnerable. We cannot continue to see the loss of civilian life and the damaging of civilian infrastructure as a result of attacks and clashes which affect the Afghan people. In this connection, Colombia appeals to all to guarantee rapid, safe, sustained and unfettered humanitarian access in accordance with international law. This is crucial in order to ensure that humanitarian personnel, including female humanitarian workers, are able to provide the assistance and essential services required by civilians. Let us here recall that respecting and enforcing international law under all circumstances and without exceptions is an obligation which itself includes protecting civilians and the infrastructure critical to their survival. It also includes protecting humanitarian personnel. Madam President, Colombia supports the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA. This mission is vital to achieve an Afghanistan which is peaceful and inclusive in nature for the benefit of the Afghan people as a whole. We appeal here to the de facto authorities to cooperate in a more structured fashion with UNAMA and to cease the continued and systematic discrimination against women and girls. That discrimination deprives half of Afghanistan's population of their rights and dignity and violates the country's obligations under international human rights law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Colombia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Madam President.
I would like to extend my utmost appreciation to Ms. Georgette Gagnon, Deputy SRSG for Afghanistan, and the staff of UNAMA for their valuable work, especially as the conditions in which the mission operates become increasingly difficult. Madam President, I would like to raise 3 points. First, over 4 years, the Taliban have only further tightened their grip, becoming more oppressive and showing no progress, not even on the commitments they previously said they would pursue. The situation of women and girls in Afghanistan is unprecedented in its severity, and it's utterly unacceptable. Nowhere else in the world do we see such widespread, systematic restrictions imposed on half of a country's population. What Afghan women face today is not a series of isolated restrictions. Since 2021, at least 118 discriminatory edicts against women and girls have been issued. It is a system of control that has become institutionalized and reaches into every area of life: education, work, movement, healthcare, public space, and even the right to speak or be seen. And it is difficult, how can one even imagine that while banning women from public space, education, and healthcare would somehow let Afghanistan become a peaceful and prosperous country? There is no chance that can happen. The Taliban are now building a legal framework that erases women's safety and dignity, and let me illustrate this. Under the newly introduced decree on the criminal rules of courts, even severe violence against wife is treated as a minor offense. Article 32 of the decree makes this painfully clear, and I'll quote: "If a husband beats his wife so severely that it results in a broken bone or an open wound, or a black and blue wound appears on her body, and the wife appeals to a judge, then the husband will be considered an offender. A judge should sentence him to 15 days imprisonment." End of quote. This tells every Afghan woman that her suffering is worth only 15 days of punishment, and only if she can show visible wounds while being forced to cover her body, and only if she can reach a judge while being accompanied by a male guardian who may well be her tormentor. And it tells every perpetrator that violence carries almost no cost. It is hard to see a starker illustration of the complete absence of access to justice, especially today, as the Commission on the Status of Women opens its 70th session with a focus on this very issue, and as we underscore the urgency of rights, justice, action on the International Women's Day. At the same time, Afghanistan is faced with one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises, we know, with more than 21 million Afghans requiring humanitarian aid. So ensuring unimpeded humanitarian access must remain a priority. And yet, even as these needs grow, the Taliban's ban on Afghan female staff accessing UN premises is still in place and in force since 7 September 2025, despite the very explicit condemnation of this decision by the international community. That is a clear violation of the UN Charter and a direct obstacle to aid delivery, as Afghan women's work is indispensable to reaching women and girls. And we demand the Taliban to reverse all of these heinous policies immediately. Secondly, Latvia supports the UN-led Doha process and the facilitation of a united approach to address the situation in Afghanistan. And this process should include non-Taliban Afghans, the full and equal meaningful participation of women, as well as civil society, allowing them to take part in setting the agenda, as it is the future of their country that is at stake. And in that regard, the timely appointment of the new SRSG for Afghanistan to lead on the political process is crucial, and so is the renewal of a strong mandate of UNAMA, which Latvia fully supports. Third, not only have the Taliban failed to make any progress on human rights, but we also continue to witness further backsliding in other areas. A wide range of terrorist groups operate in and from Afghanistan, with varying degrees of autonomy and oversight from the Taliban. And this situation poses a clear threat to regional peace and security. And the burden is entirely on the Taliban to take concrete and measurable steps to reverse this trajectory. The Afghan territory must not be used to threaten or attack its neighbors. In the light of the ongoing hostilities on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, we join the calls for restraint and that protection of civilians should remain an absolute priority, and all feasible precautions must be taken to prevent further civilian harm and for enabling humanitarian assistance. Madam President, the world shall not look the other way as the Taliban continue to erase half of Afghanistan's population and actually getting away with it. So we call on the international community to remain vigilant and to stand in steadfast support of the people of Afghanistan, especially women and girls, and Latvia will. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Afghanistan.
Madam President, let me begin by congratulating you on assuming the presidency of the Council and for your leadership during the month of March. I also thank you for convening this important meeting on the situation in Afghanistan. We also appreciate the strong joint press statement issued prior to this meeting. I'm grateful to the DSRSG, Madam Gagnon, for her detailed briefing. I thank the previous speakers for reaffirming their support for the people of Afghanistan, particularly women and girls. Madam President, yesterday marked the International Women's Day, an important moment to reflect on the challenges faced by millions of women around the world. I wish to pay tribute to the courage and determination of all women, especially the women of Afghanistan, who are engaged in a historic struggle for freedom, justice, and lasting peace. The most meaningful way to honor their commitment and sacrifice is to support their efforts to reclaim their rightful place in society and in the international community. Madam President, in five months, it will mark 5 years since the Taliban imposed their rule in Afghanistan. It is now evident to the international community and to this Council that during this period, the Taliban have taken no meaningful steps toward change, moderation, or engagement with the realities and needs of the people of Afghanistan. On the contrary, their policies have grown increasingly rigid, exclusionary, and repressive. Afghanistan continues to face a profound social, humanitarian, economic, and political crisis, a crisis that is the direct result of Taliban's policies and governance based on repression and intimidation. The systematic deprivation of women and girls of their fundamental rights and freedoms, the dismantling of inclusive institutions, widespread human rights violations, targeted killings of former security forces and civilians accused of armed opposition, rising poverty, and deepening despair have collectively pushed Afghanistan toward isolation and toward the brink. Women and girls have effectively been erased from public life. Civic space has collapsed. Economic structures have deteriorated dramatically. An entire generation is being denied education and opportunity. These, Madam President, are not unintended consequences. They are the foreseeable results of deliberate policy choices. The United Nations, international partners, and donor countries have played a crucial role in preventing a large-scale humanitarian catastrophe, and we express our sincere appreciation despite the many challenges and impediments. However, humanitarian assistance is not a sustainable solution. It cannot substitute for political legitimacy, responsible governance, or sustainable economic recovery. The recent decline in humanitarian funding against a backdrop of persistent and growing needs is deeply alarming. Madam President, the Taliban, who were themselves a primary driver of instability over the past 2 decades, now speak of bringing security and stability, yet their actions tell a very different story. A nation has effectively been pushed into isolation and taken hostage by a male-dominated group, ruling through coercion, centralized authority, and distorted interpretation of Islam against the will of the Afghan people. The proliferation of radical madrasas, the suppression of inclusive education, the consolidation of power through repression, kidnapping, and hostage-taking of Afghan and international citizens, and the continued links with the presence of international terrorist groups on Afghanistan soil are creating dangerous conditions for insecurity and instability in Afghanistan, in the region, and beyond. Contrary to the commitments made under the Doha Agreement, the Taliban have provided a permissive environment for international terrorist groups. This was once again confirmed in the 2016 report of the Security Council Sanctions Monitoring Team. This endangers, first and foremost, the people of Afghanistan and poses a serious threat to regional and international security. We are already witnessing the dangerous spillover of these dynamics. The continued Pakistani airstrikes since 22nd February have resulted in civilian casualties and escalating tensions with exchanges of artillery, drones, and ground assaults. According to UNAMA, as of 7 March, there has been at least 187 civilian casualties, 55% of whom were women and children. Such actions are unacceptable and must come to an immediate halt. Let me be clear, just as the Taliban do not represent Afghanistan, its people, its culture, or its authentic Islamic values, the violence arising from their policies, including the harboring of terrorist groups, does not represent the will of Afghan nation. As we stated in our official complaint submitted to this Council on 22nd February, we call on this Council to address this aggression and urge Pakistan to immediately cease strikes against civilian areas and vital infrastructure in Afghanistan, including facilities representing 2 decades of investment by the Afghan people and international partners. Such actions constitute a violation of territorial integrity and the principles of United Nations Charter, international law, and norms of good neighborly relations. We unequivocally condemn terrorism in all its forms, including its instrumentalization, sponsorship, and the provision of safe havens. Terrorism is our common enemy. Counterterrorism must be genuine, non-selective, and grounded in a comprehensive strategy consistent with international law. The Afghan people have suffered from terrorism for decades and must not once again become victim of irresponsible and politicized policies and proxy wars. Combating terrorism in Afghanistan can only be achieved through a responsible, legitimate, and inclusive government, one that reflects the will of the Afghan people and honors Afghanistan's international obligations. Madam President, after 5 years, the status quo in Afghanistan is neither acceptable nor sustainable. Efforts under so-called pragmatic engagement to normalize or accommodate this reality will not bring peace, stability, or prosperity. What is needed now is a renewed and coordinated international engagement under the leadership of the United Nations with the support of this Council to facilitate the emergence of a legitimate and inclusive political and constitutional order grounded in the will and aspirations of the Afghan people. Any essential engagement with the Taliban must remain principled and conditional, linked to measurable progress on human rights, inclusive governance, and counterterrorism. Accountability mechanisms, including the independent investigative mechanism in Geneva, and humanitarian and economic assistance to Afghan people must be supported. In this regard, the role of UNAMA remains essential. As we consider the renewal of its mandate, we express appreciation to the UNAMA team for their continued efforts and support the extension of its mandate. At the same time, a strong and effective mandate, together with the appointment of a capable, impartial, and dedicated special representative of Secretary General committed to human rights principles, will be critical to ensuring the balanced implementation of all 3 pillars of the mandate, including the political component. the Security Council has a central responsibility. What is required is a unified, principled, and coherent approach. Only through such an approach can we help create the conditions for emergence of a responsible, accountable, and inclusive government that respects the fundamental rights of all Afghans, including women and girls, and fulfills Afghanistan's international obligations. Madam President, allow me to conclude by outlining what the people of Afghanistan seek. They seek a country where every child can go to school. They seek a system where women can work, learn, and live with dignity. They seek accountability for those who torture, execute, and oppress, not impunity. They seek counterterrorism measures that are principled and lawful, not selective and politicized. They seek governance that reflects Afghanistan's diversity, not one that excludes. These are aspirations of Afghan people. These are universal rights. These are the commitments Afghanistan accepted when it joined this organization in November 14, 1946. We committed ourselves to faith in the fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women. And those commitments do not expire because the Taliban says so. The people of Afghanistan who have endured decades of conflict and hardship deserve peace, dignity, justice, and hope. Our collective responsibility is to stand with them and ensure that Afghanistan moves toward ensuring peace, stability, and prosperity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Madam President, I congratulate the United States for assuming the presidency of the Council, and thank you for giving me the floor. I thank Ms. Georgette Gagnon, the head of mission and deputy SRSG of UNAMA, for her briefing. India has deep-rooted and civilizational bonds with our contiguous neighbor Afghanistan. Our history of close ties keeps guiding us in the current context, a situation when the proud people of Afghanistan need the world's assistance. Over the years, India has continued to strongly advocate for peace and stability that could aid development in Afghanistan. Our participation in the Doha Working Group meetings underlines this commitment. Madam President, India prioritizes capacity building and humanitarian assistance initiatives for the Afghan people. With more than 500 development partnership projects spread across all 34 provinces of Afghanistan, we are deepening our engagement in healthcare, public infrastructure, and capacity building. We continue to work with UN agencies as well as with agencies such as the Afghanistan Red Cross Society in food security, healthcare, education, and sports. The visits of Afghan ministers last year are helping us ensure that this aid is reaching those who need it the most. Since the last briefing in December 2025, India has made significant progress in advancing healthcare support in Afghanistan. Development projects approved earlier, including the establishment of a thalassemia center, an oncology center, a trauma center, a modern diagnostic center, and the replacement of the heating system at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health, and the construction of a 30-bed hospital, all in Kabul, as well as the construction of 5 maternity health clinics in Paktika, Khos, and Paktia, are progressing steadily. In the last 3 months, which is a reporting period for the UNSG's report, India delivered more than 1 million doses of immunization vaccines for children and 9.5 tons of anti-cancer medicine. In the coming months, we aim to deliver over 17 million additional doses of preventive vaccines to further strengthen Afghanistan's national immunization program. This is India's investment in the future of Afghanistan. Over the past 4.5 years, my country has supplied 50,000 tons of wheat, 380 tons of medicines and vaccines, and 40,000 liters of pesticides. Following the 2 earthquakes last year, India was among the first to provide humanitarian assistance to the tune of 60 tons of food items, 42 tons of earthquake relief materials, and 73 tons of essential medicines. In partnership with the UN Office on Drugs and Crimes, we have provided 68 tons of medical supplies and 32 tons of social support items for the rehabilitation of drug addicts. In the field of education, our scholarship and fellowship schemes for Afghan students are always in demand. Since 2023, around 3,000 students have availed themselves of these opportunities, including 1,000 Afghan women. India continues to provide financial and logistical support to Afghan self-help groups led by women. On the bright side, any visitor to Afghanistan today would see Afghan youth enthusiastically playing cricket. The Afghanistan cricket team has been winning hearts wherever they have been playing, and their spirit and passion in the just concluded Cricket World Cup was notable. My nation is proud to be part of their journey and happy to see them bring immense joy to the people of Afghanistan who are enduring so much. Madam President, we take note of the Secretary General's report on the situation in Afghanistan, especially the dire humanitarian concerns and the rising implications for the country due to unprecedented scale and pace of forced and involuntary returns under adverse circumstances. Acute food insecurity and climate and natural hazards have led to 45% of the population requiring humanitarian assistance this year, which is a dire situation that needs the world's attention. These significant vulnerabilities necessitate more efforts towards addressing food security, healthcare, water security, and other shelter challenges. The returnees need to be provided housing, basic services, and livelihoods. We add our voice to the Secretary General's call on member states to uphold their international obligations in relation to protection, including the principle of non-refoulement, and ensure that returns are voluntary, safe, dignified, and accompanied by sustained support for reintegration of returnees into communities. The Secretary General's report also expresses deep concern at civilian casualties caused by cross-border armed violence. We reiterate and support the Secretary General's call urging compliance with obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, and ensuring protection of civilians. India strongly condemns the airstrikes on Afghan territory, which are flagrant violations of international law and the UN Charter and the principle of state sovereignty. It's hypocritical to espouse high principles of international law and Islamic solidarity on the one hand, while mercilessly carrying out airstrikes during the holy month of Ramadan that have killed 185 innocent civilians as of 6th March, around 55% of whom are women and children, and displaced over 100,000 according to the UNAMA on the other. We also reiterate a grave concern on the practice of trade and transit terrorism by denial of passage for trade and the cynical closure of access for a landlocked country. UN declarations on LLDCs sound hollow in the face of such actions. The trade and transit vulnerabilities of LLDCs should not be weaponized. This is a violation of WTO norms and of the UN Charter and international law. While we condemn these acts, we reaffirm our support for the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Afghanistan. Madam President, terrorism remains a global scourge afflicting humanity, and only coordinated efforts of the international community would ensure that ISIL and Al-Qaeda and their affiliates, including the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and the proxies of LET such as the Resistance Front, along with those who facilitate their operations, no longer indulge in cross-border terrorism. Madam President, well over 4 years have passed since the political reality of Afghanistan has changed. India reiterates the importance of incentivizing positive actions. In this context, the current UN sanctions regime related to Afghanistan must take into account contemporary realities. We call on the United Nations and the international community to shun this business-as-usual approach and adopt nimble policy instruments that bring sustainable benefits for the Afghan people who have endured suffering for so long. India reiterates its commitment to strengthen our engagement with all stakeholders in bilateral, regional, and multilateral formats. India will always stand for the priorities and aspirations of Afghan society and will always support the people of Afghanistan. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of India for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, Madam President, Excellencies, I thank Ms. Gagnon, Deputy Special Representative, for her briefing. We take note of the Secretary General's latest report on the situation in Afghanistan and activities of UNAMA. The report confirms that despite the continued efforts of UNAMA and the United Nations agencies, Afghanistan remains confronted with complex and multidimensional challenges, including a deteriorating humanitarian situation, growing security concerns, restrictions affecting women and girls, and persistent threat of terrorism. As highlighted by the Deputy SRSG in her briefing, despite these challenges, the DFA has taken positive steps to improve the situation and support economic recovery. These efforts deserve recognition and should be acknowledged by the international community. In this context, I wish to underline the following points. First, we remain deeply concerned about the worsening humanitarian and economic condition in Afghanistan. Nearly half the country population, over 21 million people, are projected to require humanitarian assistance this year. We echo the Secretary General's call on donors to provide increased, predictable, and flexible funding to the sustained life-saving humanitarian operations. Humanitarian assistance must never be politicized. Sanctions must not hinder Afghanistan's economic recovery and stabilization, and Afghan national assets frozen abroad should be released without delay so that they can be used to address the urgent needs of Afghan people. Second, the continuation of international engagement with the de facto authorities remains essential for advancing stability in Afghanistan. Meaningful and pragmatic engagement is necessary to address the humanitarian and economic crisis and to promote responsible governance. In this context, initiatives such as the Doha process can provide an important platform for dialogue and cooperation on key issues, including counter-narcotics and economic development. Iran has actively and meaningfully participated in working groups on counter-narcotics and private sectors held on 3 and 9 February. As part of this process, in this regard, Iran welcomed the report on the reduction of opium cultivation in Afghanistan. However, without effective support for alternative crops and sustainable livelihood for Afghan farmers, many may be forced out of economic necessity to return to opium cultivation. Third, the continued deprivation of women and girls of their rights to education and employment in Afghanistan is a matter of serious concern. Such restrictions on education, employment, and public participation are incompatible with the teaching of Islam and with human dignity. We call on the de facto authorities to reserve these restrictions. However, we believe that constructive engagement remains the most effective path to promote responsible conduct, uphold human rights, including the rights of ethnic groups and women. Fourth, the threat posed by the terrorist group in Afghanistan remains a grave concern. Afghanistan must not become a haven for terrorism. Likewise, the territory of Afghanistan must not be used to threaten or harm other states, especially neighbors. At the same time, military escalation and cross-border hostilities are deeply concerns and risk further destabilizing the region. Dialogue and diplomatic engagement remain the only viable path to addressing these tensions. We call on all parties to exercise restraint and to resolve their differences through diplomatic solution and peaceful means. Fifth, neighboring and regional countries remain on the front line of the consequences arising from the situation in Afghanistan. At the same time, regional initiative and cooperation mechanism among neighboring countries play an indispensable role in supporting sustainable peace, security, and stability in Afghanistan. The Islamic Republic of Iran shares a long border with Afghanistan, and for more than 4 decades has hosted millions of Afghan nationals. During this time, Iran has provided Afghan refugees with access to education, healthcare, and other essential services. This long-standing commitment reflects Iran's continued dedication to supporting the Afghan people and promoting stability and security in Afghanistan and the wider region. Yet, the ongoing unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression launched by the United States and Israeli regime on 28 February against the Islamic Republic of Iran has created a grave and dangerous situation for civilians. This war of aggression has involved deliberate attack and targeting against civilian and civilian infrastructure and densely populated areas, especially across several major Iranian cities where the millions of Afghan nationals also reside. Finally, UNAMA continues to play a vital and indispensable role in addressing Afghanistan's complex challenges and supporting the Afghan people. We reaffirm our support for extending the mandate of UNAMA for its effective and impartial implementation. Iran stands ready to continue close cooperation with the United Nations, regional countries, and all relevant stakeholders to promote stability, security, and a better future for Afghanistan. I thank you.
The representative of Pakistan has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I have been compelled to take the floor again after listening to remarks from the representatives of Afghanistan and India. Madam President, the so-called representative of Afghanistan, who in effect does not represent anyone but himself, must not abuse this forum to pursue his personal agenda. Sequestered in New York, Mr. Faik, my friend, is completely cut off from ground realities. And he chose to selectively comment on some aspects of the situation, particularly with reference to Pakistan. So therefore, the value and credibility of his remarks are in serious doubt. Pakistan's legitimate counter-terrorism operations are not directed against the brotherly people of Afghanistan and are only meant to neutralize the persistent threat of terrorism emanating from Afghan soil, and our actions are in full conformity with the right to self-defense and international humanitarian law. So it was not surprising that Mr. Faik had nothing to say about the cross-border terrorism from Afghanistan that is so heavily impacting Pakistan in terms of casualties among civilians, among our armed forces, law enforcement agencies, and infrastructure. And Madam President, given India's animosity towards Pakistan and the sole objective of its Afghan policy being to destabilize Pakistan, including by actively supporting and sponsoring terrorist groups operating from Afghan soil, such as TTP and BLA, the remarks of the Indian representative come as no surprise. India's representative deliberated at length on the security situation in Afghanistan. He mentioned civilian casualties and border clashes, but had not a word about the terrorist threat emanating from Afghanistan, which has targeted Pakistan and which many council members have highlighted in their statements. But there is a reason for that. It is India's complicity in all of this. We have provided irrefutable evidence of India's collusion with terrorist groups that are engaged in orchestrating violent attacks against Pakistan. One can sense India's pain in seeing its heavy investment in the Afghan terrorist franchise going to waste as a result of Pakistan's precise and effective action against terrorist camps and support bases inside Afghanistan. And the world needs no lectures from a serial violator of international law like India, a state that illegally occupies territory, violates UN Charter and Security Council resolutions, perpetrates state terrorism in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and beyond, systematically marginalizes its minorities, spreads hate, even weaponizes water with the express goal of starving Pakistan's population, and continues to use disinformation as a state policy. And the list goes on. So, Madam President, while India has always played the role of a spoiler in Afghanistan, Pakistan has engaged responsibly in promoting peace, stability, and prosperity in Afghanistan. But these goals can only be promoted if the Taliban regime fulfills its commitments with respect to counterterrorism, inclusive governance, and upholding the rights of Afghan women and girls, three key areas that were highlighted by the Council members in today's discussion. India in particular must cease and desist from its policy of stoking terrorism inside Pakistan from Afghan soil, now together with their newfound friends in the Taliban regime. While India has long played this dangerous game, we will not allow their sabotage and subversion from Afghan soil to nourish and harm Pakistan. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. The representative of India has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I now give them the floor.
Madam President, I could not have expected anything better from the esteemed representative of Pakistan. The laundry list that is regurgitated ad nauseum at every meeting of the Council and wastes the time of this august body is well known. I reiterate what I have said in my statement. India's assistance is directed at the friendly people of Afghanistan. What we have done in Afghanistan is known to the people of Afghanistan and to the international community. I need add no further comment. As far as problems in Pakistan are concerned, Pakistan would do well to look in the mirror and look at problems within, rather than blame my country for what it faces. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of India for the statement. The representative of Afghanistan has asked for the floor to make a statement. I now give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to react and use the right of reply to the remarks made by my dear friend, Ambassador Ahmad. I just wanted to echo that the current status quo in Afghanistan is one of the wrong policies of our neighboring countries, particularly those who provided the same groups and supported them in the past 2 decades. And we hope that the current situation can be a good opportunity to learn from the past experiences and correct the policies. And we have to fight and combat the terrorism without any distinction. And we have condemned in our statement that terrorism is the common enemy, and we should always fight against terrorism without any distinction. And terrorist groups are all the same. The situation in Afghanistan today, we share the sufferings of our neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan and the people of Pakistan. But over the past 2 decades, the Afghan people have also suffered the same situation every day, with suicide attacks, with bomb attacks, with civilians were targeted with the same terrorist group. And we have always been asking the Council, and we have been always condemning the terrorism and asking our neighboring countries to fight against terrorism without any distinction. So that is something that we wanted to share, and we are hopeful that the current situation can really provide an opportunity for creating a legitimate government, a government that's committed to international obligations and also to the protection of the rights of Afghan people, and can help create a state that Afghan people can live in peace with itself and also with its neighboring countries. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. This meeting is adjourned.
Tyler.